and welcome to the Scotichronicast, the podcast which discusses all things relating to medieval Scotland. I'm your host, Dr. Kate Buchanan. This is episode 7, and I am excited to be joined by Dr. Amy Hayes. Welcome to the Scotichronicast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining me today. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Amy Hayes, and I'm a Scottish medieval historian. And I currently work between two different universities. So I'm a lecturer in history at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and I'm a staff tutor in the history department of the Open University as well.
Great. So, well, you came to studying history a little bit differently, didn't you? Like, you didn't initially start as history being your main focus of study.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of an accidental historian. So I went to university to study English literature, and I'm from the north of England originally, but I wanted to go to university in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And the system in Scotland is a little different to England in that I had to take 2 additional subjects in my first year. So I went off to do, what did I do? I did literature, linguistics, and then I was going to do psychology, I think, for my third one. But psychology was full, and my sort of academic tutor person was like, oh, why don't you do history? That would fit well. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that then. Yeah, and then the rest is history, as it were. So I just, I really enjoyed it. I had a really good lecturer, and I just loved the subject. So I changed, after the first year, I changed my degree to a joint honours, because I realised that actually I kind of wanted to keep going and keep learning. Right. Yeah, so that's kind of how I came about it. And then I guess even then I didn't really think that I was going to do history. So my undergraduate dissertation was in literature, and originally my master's was going to be joint supervised with the English department, but somebody left and there wasn't anyone else, and I kind of fell into history. Right. And here I stay.
What did you study for your master's? What was the topic for that?
So my master's was Margaret of Denmark, who was the wife of James III of Scotland. And I guess, again, like an accidental fall in there, really.
I love these accidents. They're the best.
Yeah. So my undergraduate dissertation was in creative writing, and I wrote historical fiction. So I've always, that's kind of like my guilty secret as a historian, is that I really like historical fiction. Yeah, so what did I write? I wrote about Lady Jane Grey.
That's right.
Yeah, 9 Days Queen. And so I had always had an interest in sort of women in history, and I can vividly remember going to my said interesting lecturer's room at the university and saying I wanted to do a master's, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something on women. And he was like, why don't you look at queens, because they leave more of a impact on the record. And Dr. Penman, who was my master's supervisor, he'd studied under Norma MacDougall, who had looked at James III, and so he was like, oh, what about Margaret of Denmark, his wife? And that's kind of where it went.
That's cool. Yeah, so you did that at the University of Stirling.
I did, yes. So it was a master's by research. So it was, I think, really good actual preparation for a Ph.D, because it was pretty much, you were unleashed on the world of research. You wrote like a mini dissertation, and you had like training blocks and things, but it wasn't like a taught master's. So actually for me, that was a bit of a culture shock, because I hadn't done historical research before. I kind of learned on the job a little bit there. So I don't think I really had much of a concept of what like archival research was until I had to write 20,000 words. But it, obviously it didn't put me off. So
yeah. Exactly. And then you obviously moved on to do your PhD.
So I went to Aberdeen to do my PhD, and I thought that I would keep studying Margaret, mainly because I felt like my master's had kind of scraped the surface, but I hadn't really, I felt like there was probably more there, because she seemed really enigmatic. So I felt very much like there must be records that I hadn't uncovered.
Right.
There weren't. So sadly, there was a reason for the enigma. So I went trotting off rather innocently to Aberdeen, thinking that I was going to spend 3 or 4 years studying one queen. And within the first 2 weeks, one of my supervisors was like, "That's not going to happen." And I was like, "Oh, that's just not right. This is fine." And then 2 weeks later, I was like, "Yeah, no, you're right." So I went from studying one queen to studying 6 queens and sort of queenship much more broadly.
Right. Well, 6 is a big jump there.
Yeah. I just kept adding them. There was there was 4 or 5, and then I was partway through my research, and I can remember trundling in and sort of being like, "Well, I think I'm going to add Euphemia Ross on to the beginning. Just going to add another queen in there to give it a nice round number."
I imagine it being like you're going shopping and you're just like walking down the aisle, and it's like, "Yeah, I'll just add this one in. I'll just add this one."
Yeah, pretty much.
Looks nice.
I'm quite indecisive, so sometimes I'm like, I'll just buy them all and try them on later, and then I kept them.
Yeah. Okay, so you had 6 queens. Which queens were they?
So I've got the queens of the sort of earlier Stuarts. So I start with Euphemia Ross. So we start in 1371. So she was the wife of Robert II. And then I run up to Margaret Tudor, who was the wife of James IV. And then kind of everyone in between. So we've got Euphemia Ross, Annabella Drummond, Joan Beaufort, Mary of Guelders, Margaret of Denmark is in there. I did keep her. And then Margaret Tudor as well.
Cool. So what's kind of your end date then?
Round about 1513-ish. So 1513, as that's when James IV died. Obviously, Margaret Tudor, she was quite a long time, actually, as much as these things go. But things become very political after that, and my sort of primary interest is not really in sort of the politics and sort of regency issues. So I say 1513-ish because I do sometimes, if there's a really interesting source in like 1517, that is helpful.
Right.
I don't not look at it, but I try and sort of come to a rough stop around about then.
Got it. Well, cool. So it's quite a broad time frame that you cover then.
Yeah. I guess it is. Like I say, I just kind of kept on adding them.
Yeah.
But it's useful, I think, to be broad. I think Scottish history can suffer from like a lack of survival of records. And I'm sure this is something, I don't need to tell you, and I'm sure this is something your other guests have spoken about. So
it is a common theme. Yeah.
You never meet a Scottish historian who doesn't just look a bit sad as they look at like the English archives or something. So yeah, I kind of think of them as like I guess a jigsaw of queenship, and different queens will give me kind of different pieces to put together. Right.
Well, do you have a favorite queen?
Oh no. No, I don't. Like, sometimes I think I do, if I'm writing about one of them in particular.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to someone the other week about Mary of Guelders, but I don't think I could pick one. I don't think I could. Maybe if I was forced, it might be Mary of Guelders, but
right.
I think it would make the other one sad if I picked one. So what are you going to do?
We wouldn't want to do that. Cool. So have you been able to do much after you've finished your PhD? Are you working on moving the thesis to the book or other such projects?
Yeah. Well, I finished my PhD in 2016, and then I kind of took a step back from academia. I thought that I was done with it.
Yeah.
So I became a manager in student housing.
Okay.
And I did that for about 6 months, and then I kind of realized the kind of non-academic world was just not really for me.
Right.
And I kind of slowly moved back to academia through a bit of a roundabout route. So I got a very part-time teaching position at the Open University kind of at the end of 2016. So I went part-time at my day job and part-time at that. And then over time, I built up the academic teaching.
Uh-huh.
And I worked at Historic Scotland for a little while as well.
Cool.
Where I could basically tell people about history who came to visit. But for the last, I think about 2 years now, I've been back to kind of full-time teaching in academia. So teaching has taken up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
But I am slowly working on making the thesis into a book. So I'm actually just trying to write my introduction at the moment.
Oh, exciting.
To send that off to the editor. Yes, yeah. And then also been looking at a couple of earlier queens. So I've done some work on the queens of David II. So kind of the 2 queens before my run. And then, so still kind of mostly queens and queenship, I guess.
Right.
Still very, very dominant.
That's cool. I guess I kind of find it interesting going earlier just because our previous comments about sources. But how is that? How is that going?
You think I'd make it easier for myself? Like Marie de Guise, who comes after Margaret Tudor, like there are actual household accounts, but I'm just like, no, it's too modern for me. I don't know why I do it. I think I just find it. I don't know. I just find them really intriguing, and what I also find intriguing is that no one else is really looking at them. So we have all like this knowledge and all this information about queenship in England or in France. Like queenship studies now is such a kind of, I suppose, booming market, as it were. Like you can go and you can do a master's in queenship.
Oh wow!
Yeah. But not in Scottish queenship. So yeah, I think that's kind of what intrigues me. And I think as well, knowing more about the kind of earlier queens has actually really helped me sort of piece together the sort of shifting patterns in queenship.
Right.
Because you kind of look at them initially and you think, oh, this is odd, or this doesn't make sense, like there's no pattern here.
Right.
But when you take that kind of much wider scope, you start to realize, actually, this is reflecting a previous pattern, but it's just that, there's been an unfortunate run of kings dying young, so queenship hasn't developed, or the wars of independence get in the way, or things like that.
Right.
Yes, but maybe one day I'll push a bit later. I think I don't know. I think I kind of see the Reformation and kind of come to a screeching halt. To be honest, I think that's what stopped me.
I think that's a lot of us do. Yeah. It's just like, it's not like medieval Scotland is already like incredibly complicated, and the political structure is really complicated, and then you throw the Reformation in there and it just like adds a whole new level, and it's just like, you know what, no,
maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, I actually, ironically, I suppose, I teach early modern history.
Right.
So I kind of, I think a lot of medievalists do, don't they, sort of fall into that trope. But I think my research definitely stays kind of middle ages.
Yeah. So have you been able to incorporate much of your research into what you're teaching?
I guess a little bit. I am one of those people, I suppose, when I'm, even when I'm teaching my early modern class, I love talking about the position of women in society. So although my research really looks at the sort of top of the pyramid, as it were, I still am really interested in women's experiences and the sort of, I'm not quite gender studies. I'm probably more of a women's historian than a gender historian, but I do really enjoy kind of bringing that in. And I find what I actually really enjoy is encouraging my students to kind of question the stereotypes, actually, because a lot of students, when they first come to do medieval history or early modern history, they think, oh, well, all women were this or all women were that. And actually, I really like being like, that's not true. So, I guess there aren't maybe as many queens in my teaching as I would like there to be. But there's certainly sort of women and questions of kind of women's position and power. I find good to bring in.
That's cool. Yeah, that's very useful. I have occasionally some of my master's students end up doing sort of gendered studies or studies on women in particular, and it's always interesting how they because they start much later because they're usually doing things. Usually it's either the American Revolution or World War I, World War II that they're looking at. But it's always have to have a discussion with them. It's their interpretation of when women started to do things in the world is like, well, let's look a little bit further back.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think there is just, the kind of assumption, I guess, that women were in a box and then they came out of the box at some point in the 19th or 20th century, and you're like, no.
Yeah.
Not how it went.
Yeah, and it's like I think I discussed in episode 2 with Katie Jack, just like when you see some women in the sources, she was pointing out like, well, like why are we double questioning these women when we would give the men like absolute credence for what they're doing with these sources? And be like, oh, well, it's obvious they're doing this, that, and the other. Whereas if it's a woman in the source with the same limited number, it's not something that we would be like, oh, well, clearly, oh, no, we have to have more sources. We can't be certain they're doing this.
Yeah, I think that is the thing, isn't it? I think if we see women in the sources acting in a way that we don't expect, then we assume that they're exceptional, or we can't trust that. So, we must assume that, we need to find another source to back it up, as you say, or, the woman is only acting in that way because of really, really rare circumstances, or
right. She's been forced to play the part of the man or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't really help that the chroniclers themselves will then, describe those women in sort of manly terms. So, Margaret of Anjou is Queen of England, but she does pop up in different sources, and she's, I think she's described as acting in a manly way, and so we think, oh well, this must be really surprising. But actually, when you sit down and think about all the manly or lordly women, I think you start to realise that actually it wasn't as unusual as all of that, or perhaps not as unexpected, or that they were capable of these things, for sure.
Yeah, and then it might have been a little bit more common than we assume they are, or at least not unexpected of these women in the positions that they are in.
Yeah, and I think especially in Scotland, where, in the sort of medieval period, you do have a lot of you've had a lot of strife. I mean, we can't get away from the kind of wars of independence and the kind of impact that they had on society. And I think that did mean that actually, women did sometimes have to, defend a castle, or
right. Yeah, it's like being a noble man in medieval Scotland, like a sure way to ensure like short life expectancy.
Yeah, or being a king for that matter.
Exactly.
They didn't live that long, and it's who kind of ensures the smooth transition to the sort of heir if they're young, and it's often a woman passing that kind of responsibility or power along. I think as well, actually, though, on that kind of vein, and certainly in terms of queenship in Scotland, the chroniclers are like the sources don't help us with that.
Right.
So I really found that so I'm quite interested in whether being a Scottish queen was different to being, a queen of somewhere else in Europe.
Right.
And I often find that actually, maybe not in terms of the way that the women attempted to sort of exert authority or power, but actually the way they're written about in Scottish sources does tend to downplay their actions in comparison. So Joan Beaufort, her sort of actions when James I is murdered, quite vengeful, really. She's very active, and, she's sort of keen to get vengeance. But the Scottish writings really downplay that, but it's the English and French sources that are like, she did this and she did that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Scottish sources just sort of say the nobles did this. So I think they don't help us kind of in that kind of way.
Yeah. So have you been able to find a good amount of sources from other countries about your queens?
Not as many as I would like. So I think when I come to work on that for the book as opposed to the thesis, I think that comparative angle is something I'm going to look into more. So the sort of example of Joan Beaufort is one that I found really striking, and she's popping up in two quite not obscure chronicles. I think that's a fair way to say it, but two sort of shorter chronicles, one English and one French one. And I think that's when it really kind of struck me that actually it is worth looking outside of Scotland and seeing.
Right.
I think even when the queens aren't mentioned, it's really useful to kind of compare attitudes to sort of women or queens in power.
Right.
Again, to kind of work out if being a Scottish queen was different. I've not made my mind up. I keep flicking between it.
Yeah, that's cool. So for the sources that you've found that are not within Scotland, have you had to go abroad to get them, or have they been made available via more convenient digital means?
Yeah, I guess I'm quite lucky in that a lot of the sources I look at have been published. So a lot of the sources I look at when I'm trying to work out kind of sort of ideal concepts of how these queens should and shouldn't act are literary sources.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, I suppose betraying my kind of non-traditional historian, I look at things like chronicles, like I said, but also sort of poetry, sort of prose works, things like that. So in a way, it's lucky because a lot of these things are already in, edited collections. It's like putting a different lens on something that's already been put in the public eye. So I've been lucky in that regard. Things like letters and things like that, I think unfortunately, there are so few of them that the kind of fortunate flip to that is that they have been usually catalogued at least. So they'll usually be, I guess, so Margaret Tudor, for example, sort of huge, prolific letter writer, her letters aren't published yet, although I do know someone working on a really interesting edition of them.
Cool.
So that's a kind of watch that space. But they have, at least because she's Henry VIII's sister, they've at least been catalogued.
Right.
In that regard. And then queens a lot of the evidence tends to be in sort of linked in with the king. So you'll get like petitions to the Pope, for example. And again, these things have been printed and looked at sort of from the political angle, from the king's angle. It's just that no one's really sort of thought, hang on, how many queens are doing this? Like, how common is it for it to be the queen's petition? As well as the king's and things like that. So yeah, it's been quite convenient in that regard. I suppose I haven't had to do much wild traveling.
Wild hunting. Well, that's cool. That's nice that they're generally easy to find. I mean, in quote marks, I guess.
I just wish there were more of them.
Right, exactly.
I wish less of them were in Latin. Would be my Latin has never been my strongest suit. It's been my bugbear. But yeah, kind of got to be prepared for that, I suppose.
It is. It just comes part and parcel with the whole medieval.
It kind of does, doesn't it? Again, you can tell I sort of naively stumbled into this, not really thinking too hard about it. But and I think as well, like Scottish medieval Latin is like a kind of special beast unto itself.
Obviously, I haven't actually looked into many other countries' Latin, but it would be interesting to see, like, how, is Scottish medieval Latin the most unique, or is it just that, like, each country kind of developed their own?
Yeah, there's like a linguistic study to be had there. I will say that when I had my my Viva, my internal examiner was she studied the, I think, 12th century and much more kind of classical Latin sources. So one of the comments that I had to defend was that she assumed that I had spelled a lot of my Latin quotations incorrectly and that I'd muddled up things, because you get a lot of it would translate to like the Lord Queen instead of Lady Queen. It's like the wrong ending. And she was like, you're going to have to correct this. And I kind of had to convince her that actually, no, this was what was written. So we sort of had a debate about whether we would need to put sort of sick after every quote. And I was like, that's going to push my word count right up there. So
after every single word.
Yeah. So we eventually settled on there's a little defensive statement at the front of my PhD that says all Latin sources are taken as written in the Exchequer Rolls. Right. So that was not something I'd expected to have to defend. I had to do so vigorously.
That's an interesting element to it. Oh man, I imagine. I just can't imagine somebody that's like expecting Latin to be like, the clean Latin that you could actually read, to then like hop into these sources and be like, huh.
She must have been like, what is this woman doing? Like, why has she misspelled this all the way through?
It's like, oh, the grammar for all of this is terrible. It's like, yes, it is.
And like even now, like people are like, oh, you're a historian, and they're like, oh, well, what does this Latin quote say? And I'm like, I don't know, because that's not the Latin I read.
Yeah, I know very specific Latin, and it just doesn't really work anywhere else.
Yeah, it's like, you can pass me a charter or you can pass me a financial record and I'll tell you what that says, but I don't know what that quote says.
Right. Yeah, it's too clean. Ugh, all that grammar makes sense. I don't know what's going on there.
That's not how we work.
Okay, so Latin was potentially the most challenging part of all of it. What was the most fun?
Oh, probably realising I was done with the Latin. Sort of slamming the last exchequer roll shut and being smug, I suppose. I don't know. Do you know? I've never been asked that. I think the things that were the most kind of enjoyable were, like turning around and realizing that something you'd found really, really difficult to get into, or something that you thought you wouldn't be able to unpick.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, you'd turn around and you'd be like, I've got it. I figured it out. Like, this makes sense. I think there's something really satisfying about, it's that like analogy of a puzzle, but like piecing it together, and it's so frustrating, but you then turn a corner and you're like, oh, I can see something here. This makes sense to me.
Right. This is all, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's easily the most kind of satisfying thing. And sometimes I still, like, now have to go back to my notes and I'm just like, I don't understand any of this.
Right.
What was I thinking? Yeah, but definitely that kind of satisfaction. And I think I'm always vaguely surprised to turn around and be like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I so wish I was way more organized with my note taking.
Yeah, I still have all my files, and I say that one day I'm going to sit down and put them in order.
Yeah. Everything's just kind of in random boxes for me because I've moved like so many times, and it's like it's somewhere. I don't know. It's just somewhere. Yeah,
me too. I just have. I must have got them cheap on offer because I have some very garish pink files with white stars all over them that I assume were cheap.
Nice.
Sort of like big box files, purple ones and pink ones. Yeah, never really had the heart to go through them yet. You don't want to throw anything away.
Yeah, I'm kind of reluctant too because I'm afraid I'm gonna find so much of it like useless. Like, why did I save this? This is
yeah. Why did I take this note?
Right. Yeah. And I know that I was not very good at taking notes. I thought I was at the time, but like now it's like, no, this is not, you did not take notes in a sustainable way for like long-term research.
No, but I still do it now. Like, I still do it to myself. So when I wrote my PhD, like, one of the hard things at the end was like doing all the footnotes and going back through to where I would literally have just written C. McDougall. And like, McDougall has written 2 editions of the same book, a second book, multiple articles, like, and I'd be like, which one and where? And so I was like, okay, when I come back to academia, I'm going to do that different. And I think I'm doing it different. So when I was doing research on David's Queens, and I was in the National Library, and I was like, yes, I've got this. I'm taking really good notes. And then lockdown happened, and I had to write up what I'd done, and I realised that my notes were full of missing page numbers or, C. Penman. So I had to do a lot of begging on Twitter for people who might have the books on their shelves because I couldn't go back to the library. So,
and it's, I know, it's just like you need to really take notes as if like the future you has no idea what's going on, because you never actually know how much further down the line this is going to be when you look at them. I always, had great ambitions that I'd like take all the handwritten notes and then I'd get home and, after having dinner or whatever, I'd sit down with a nice, glass of wine or whatever and type up my notes in this nice, like, indexed thing. I also had the same plan for like pictures from field trips that I'd like organize them and actually, put where they are or what they were. The date, anything. And no. So I just have like these massive piles of things and all these pictures of like, I have no idea where this is.
Just like a box of pictures of fields and
it's like, this is a stone. I can see that this is a stone wall, and there is something interesting there. I see that why I took the picture, but I have no idea what the location is.
How do I reference this? Yeah. I spent I wrote this chapter on David's Queens, and I'd come up with this like really novel idea that I was really pleased with. And then I was like, oh, like nobody's said this before. Like this is really intriguing. And it was based on like a payment that had been made. And, and I'd said in my notes, see green, Lives of the Princesses of England. And I was like, right, okay. And then I went back to it and I couldn't find it anywhere.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, okay, it mustn't have been green. It must have been the original document because we have their marriage contract. And I took to Twitter and does anyone have the book that this is published in? So the library's closed. And
right.
Someone very kindly sent me a scan and they were like, that I can't see anything of that in there because that seems really interesting. And it turned out I essentially in my note taking made the whole thing up. This £100 payment. I later found reference to £100 for something else, and obviously my brain in my notes had just written this down.
Right,
it wasn't true.
Oh.
I spent about a half a day searching for this, and then I had to rewrite a good chunk of my chapter because I was like, I cannot prove that theory at all. Oh well.
Fact check yourself.
Yes, yeah, always fact check yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you get into this like weird mindset when you're in a library or like in the archives and stuff, and you're so like zoned in on all these sources, and your brain is just like moving really fast. And so sometimes your notes are just like, I was clearly drawing a lot of great conclusions here.
It is. I think saying you're zoned in is a really good one because you just get into it and you're like, I'll just read one more page.
Yeah.
And then an hour passes and you're like, oh, I'm quite hungry.
Right.
This doesn't make sense anymore, but I was thinking something really clear.
Yeah. Why did this happen this way? I just don't know why none of this makes sense. Why can't I translate this? Oh, because it's like, 3:00 and you've not had a break since you came in at 10.
Yeah, and this is what they don't tell you when you do your master's or the first year of your PhD.
Yeah.
Come with like a little sticker warning.
Yeah. Go for a walk.
Go get some fresh air.
Go have something to eat.
Yeah, or when you're I guess when you're in the archives and you've got like, they give you like the metal box and it's unsorted and you're just sort of scrabbling happily.
Yeah. And it's like, for me, it was always like, oh, well, I don't want to be wasting the archivist's time. So, I don't want to go for a break because then like, it's going to be a bother for them. So I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to plow through and, it'll only be like half an hour more before I get,
Yeah, it's not worth putting everything away and then checking it back out again.
Exactly. Oh, man.
The joys.
Yes. It is a lot of fun. But yeah.
I was going to say, this all sounds quite negative, but actually I think when you're in there, it's, remarkably sort of entertaining.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. But yeah, there's just some things that I think all of us are kind of like, I wish I had known that before I started doing stuff.
Yes. But like I say, I know it now and I still haven't really changed my ways.
Right, yeah, exactly. Or, this is advice I'm giving to my future self if ever I actually make it into an archive ever again.
Yes, if anything ever opens again. Again, I have grand plans to, take a little laptop and type things up straight away and not have them penciled into my notebook, but it won't happen.
Yeah, we can dream.
I think sometimes you have to just embrace the slightly mad historian stereotype, don't you? It's a stereotype, and you're found amongst a pile of dusty books. You just have to go with it.
Yes, yep, definitely. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be able to talk about my own research for a while.
Yeah.
It's a kind of every historian enjoys. So.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, some of your work is just super fascinating, and I look forward to reading the book.
Yeah, thank you. It's a labor of love.
Hi everyone. A quick announcement before I sign off. The Scotichronicast has found a home with medievalists.net, where you can find a bunch of wonderful articles, videos, and podcasts relating to the Middle Ages. You should go check it out, and if you like what you are reading and hearing, consider becoming a patron of medievalists.net on Patreon.
Thank you for joining us on the Scotichronicast. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can also follow our account on Twitter at Scotichronicast. Our music is Ex te Lux Oratur by Gaita. Thanks for listening.